Hi guys, welcome to chapter 4. This is a chapter on socialization, and this is going into more detail about some of the things we discussed in the last chapter um, about the process of learning society's norms and values. Once again, socialization happens mostly through the family, although there's many other areas, or what we call them are agents of socialization. There's many other spaces, such as the school, schools, the workplace. There can be total institutions like prisons or the military. It's just areas where we're learning how to behave, what's the appropriate way to behave, and even values. Okay, so what to believe based on what are norms in the society. One thing that we do want to make sure that we understand is that socialization can't explain everything in terms of a person's personality. So we as sociologists acknowledge that your social environment is very important in shaping a lot of your beliefs and the way you behave, but it doesn't explain it 100%. So there are some biological factors that we do need to take into consideration, and there are some kind of unexplained um, connections that people can have with family members that they may not have even met before. So, for example, if a family member of yours, say your mom or your dad, has ever told you, you act just like your aunt such and such, or you act just like your grandmother, and you may not have ever met this person. In that sense, sometimes certain traits can be passed down biologically. But as sociologists, we tend to we tend to believe that the majority of a person's uh, the way that a person behaves and these big values that people have that are deeply instilled in them, mostly these norms and values are taught, and we will go through some of the venues in which these norms and values are taught and what types of norms and values we're talking about. Now, several sociologists in the past have come up with theories about different stages of development. For example, a very famous sociologist named Charles Horton Cooley theorized that our idea of the self, our own self identity, only emerges once we reach an age where we can understand that other people look at us and judge us. And it's at this point that our personality really develops because we adjust our personality depending on the feedback that we get from others that we're interacting with. So if we get a positive response from the way we're behaving or the things that we're saying, well, then we try to replicate that. If we get a negative response, well, then the next time we might try to adjust our behavior in order to be accepted by those that we're interacting with. So it's this very powerful theory that our own self identity is really nothing without human interaction, without that ability to interact with others. And these other people kind of have a very important influence on our personality. Additionally, another extremely popular, famous sociologist by the name of George Herbert Mead developed another theory about how we develop, how the self develops from infants to childhood to adolescence to adulthood. What Charles Herbert Mead concentrated on was that moment when infants understand that there are other people out there besides only themselves. Let me try to break this down. If you've ever spent any time around toddlers, you will notice that they believe that the world revolves around them. So it's all about I. If they ask for candy and you don't give it to them, they will throw a hissy fit, screaming, you name it. And if you try to logically explain to them that no, you cannot have candy because A, B, or C, they do not understand it because it's simply a matter of, I want candy now, you're not giving it to me. That's not being satisfied. I'm not being satisfied. It's all about the world is kind of revolves around them. Um, Eventually, as Mead explains, infants learn that it's not just about all about me, but there's actually others out there. And once they understand that there are other people out there besides themselves that have feelings and that are affected by their actions, so if you hit another little toddler, if you hit anybody, they hurt and that makes them sad. If you understand that your actions have an impact on others around you, it's at that point that they understand the me. Now, when they learn about the generalized other, that means that infants become aware that not only are there other people around them, meaning like their immediate family members or people that are right there next to them at that moment, but once they understand about the generalized other, that means that they understand that there's a whole world out there. There's a whole host of people, a whole society judging them, and that they have to adjust their behavior so that they can fit into this larger generalized other. And this is extremely profound because this is that moment, according to George Herbert Mead, that people begin to understand that they should act a certain way in order to fit into society. Um, and this is the power of socialization, being taught these norms and values, and at the same time understanding that I'm gonna behave this way, and if I want to fit into society, and ultimately if I want to survive in the world that I'm growing up in. Now, specifically, George Herbert Mead talked about imitation being that first instance where children learn about the other. Then children move on to play. So at this point, usually, playing dress up, playing pretend, children can learn to actually distinguish themselves from others. They can actually pretend to be others. And it's profound because it's the first moment that they can know that they have their own self-identity, but then take on another identity, even if it's just in play. After play comes games, which is a much more complex understanding of the other. When children engage in games, they can play multiple roles. They can shift from one role to another. They can understand that others can have multiple roles, which is profound, really, in the sense that in the real world, people do play multiple roles. Now, here's the question: where does socialization occur? We talked about the family being the most important agent of socialization. It's because socialization occurs from when you are a baby, sometimes before you're even born. For example, um, before you are even born, if your parents knew or know the sex of the baby, they've already picked out clothing that's one color or the other because, for example, society deems blue a boy color and pink a girl color, even though this is socially constructed. Um, for example, in the 40s, infants really wore white. There wasn't this infatuation with blue and pink. This is a more recent phenomenon. But nonetheless, these gender roles, so assigning a certain role to either a boy or a girl based on their sex, okay, because remember, sex is different from gender. Sex is our biological differences in terms of whether you have a penis or a vagina. Gender is the rules that we attach to those biological traits. So, gender meaning femininity and masculinity. So, you have the family, you have the school, so you have elementary school. It's at elementary school, for example, that children learn that they need to sit down and be quiet and face the teacher as the teacher speaks. It's the place where children learn to stand in line. It's the place where children learn to talk at a certain level while they're inside versus while they're outside. And these are very important lessons that people learn because as they get older, they apply these. So if you're in a store, you're going to talk at a certain level versus whether you're at a park or at a barbecue with a family, with your family, for example. Peers are also an agent of socialization. So when we're around our peers, especially we're in when we're teenagers, we monitor our behavior so as to fit in. This is what we call peer pressure. It's a very sociological concept, peer pressure. More often than not, people want to fit in, and they don't want to do or say things that might ostracize them or make them stand out. Um, Total institutions, on the other hand, so we talked about family, schools, peers. We also talked about the media in the last lecture as agents of socialization. Total institutions are institutions like the military or prison, where people are totally immersed in a new type of lifestyle, where they must surrender themselves to a larger authority, and they must re-socialize themselves. So they must learn new rules and new modes of behavior. And they call them total institutions because they are enclosed, intense institutions where it's very authoritative. You don't have a choice. You have to shave your hair. You have to wear the same outfit as everybody else. You have to follow the same rules as everybody else. So they call them a total institution. Now, in talking about socialization, let's go into a little bit more detail about how we as human beings are socialized, how we interact with others based on the roles and statuses that we occupy. And we look towards Robert Merton's role theory to explain some of these concepts. First of all, a status is your social position. It's the position that you occupy in society that brings along a set of expectations. So people look to you and expect you to behave a certain way based on your status. Now we have ascribed statuses, which are statuses that we're born with. And then we have achieved statuses, which are statuses that we earn. For example, an ascribed status, one that you're born with, could be the status of being a sister. Achieved status could be a professor. So it's something that you had to go out and earn. You had to earn that degree, get that job, so you've achieved that status. A master status is an important concept to understand, and that is a status that seems to stand out over all others, and that has oftentimes certain consequences. So, for example, a person who's black is oftentimes looked upon first and foremost as a black person. Maybe a person who's Native American is above all other characteristics described by their ethnicity, first and foremost. If you're a gay or lesbian, oftentimes, no matter what your job is, no matter what types of experiences that you have, whatever you can bring to the table, the fact that you're gay sticks out as the master status. It's that one thing that people associate you with the most. Um, Roles are the way that we behave based on what our status is. So, for example, your role as a student is to buy your textbook, study the chapters, and take your quizzes, and hopefully pass the class. My role as a mother is to make sure my child is fed, clothed, loved, etc. It's the different duties and behaviors that are attached to our particular status. Now, role conflict happens when a person has two different roles to perform and they conflict with each other. For example, if you're a mother and a student, you might have class one day and your child might have a soccer game at the same time. You have to choose between your two roles because they're conflicting with one another. With role strain, you only have one role which conflicts with itself. For example, if you're a student and you know you're supposed to study tonight, however, there's a party going on and you want to go out, you want to have fun. This conflict between these two different roles within one status is what we call role strain. Now, let's talk for a second about gender roles. And gender roles are behavioral norms that we teach to males or females, males and females, depending on what we deem as appropriate in terms of behavior for boys versus girls. Now, let me give you just an example. In our modern American society, we still teach young girls to be cooks. So we teach girls how to cook when we might not necessarily teach boys how to cook. Women in most American families are still considered to be responsible for cooking, and they're also still considered responsible to do most of the child rearing. Okay, and this is, of course, there's always exceptions. You're always